Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rick Siegfried. I'm a EAA Warbirds of America board member, and I've been active in the organization for a number of years. I'm the past president, and I think what we're trying to attempt is reach out to all of our membership all across the world and have these weekly little sessions where everybody gets to have a little session with our individual board members that we'll post weekly and then archive on our EAA Warbirds of America website. These are nice little programs. We get to interact a little bit directly with a member, and we're really looking forward to the program that we've begun to put together here. I'm in the suburbs of Chicago right now. That's in general, I'm within just a few miles of where I basically grew up. I'm very fortunate. I come from an aviation family. My father was a professional pilot, and all of my mom and dad had 5 kids. Everybody flies airplanes. Only the boys still fly aircraft today. We're all members of EAA, Warbirds of America, EAA, and pretty active in it. I was, again, very fortunate to grow up in that family. It was great. For my high school graduation present, I actually flew my first Warbird. Dad went out and found a Stearman that was available to rent and that you could check in down in Streator, Illinois. And I actually went down to Streator one June at the end of 1969 and flew that Stearman for a day, got to solo the Stearman, which is something we don't get a chance to do much anymore. That's kind of unusual, but it was great. My older brother, also took the opportunity to get a chance to solo that same Stearman. And that was kind of my first introduction to Warbirds. Back when I was a kid growing up, it seemed like every airport around the Chicago area had a T6 or sitting out in the grass with the weeds growing up around it. And they were great airplanes. And I just, was enamored by them. Somebody would come out every few months and work on the airplane a little bit and then go flying. But at the time, they were considered pretty expensive and gas guzzlers, so they didn't get used that often. There was a P-51 out at my neighborhood airport that flew occasionally, and that was always fun to see. And so I've been around Warbirds on the outside of it for a long time. I went off to find my aviation career. I ran a glider school for a number of years in the Chicago area. Then I went out to fly freight in the middle of the night, a common entry-level position for fledgling pilots around the country, and still is. And so I did that for a number of years and started off in Aztecs and Aerostars and ended up flying Citations and Learjets for a company until I finally ended up getting a job with United Airlines in the late 70s. And I stayed for many, many years there and flew several different types of airplane and really had a great time and a great career with them. I got involved in Warbirds when I was actually sitting on a ramp out in Westchester County in the left seat of a 737, and a AT6 pulled up to the little terminal area back before all the security issues. And a man and a woman got it out of the airplane and took a suitcase out of the back. And sure enough, that woman walked into the terminal and ended up walking on my airplane. And I flew her back to Chicago. And I said, I need to look into owning one of those type of airplanes. So we got together with some friends of mine and we put together a partnership and bought an AT6, which I still currently own today. And I've had that airplane over 25 years. I guess that was 92. So it goes back even a little further now. And I really enjoyed it. I fly the airplane at least once a week, pretty much all season long. Lives in a nice heated air conditioned hangar throughout the year. So I'm able to fly it really, even here in Chicago, a lot. And I really have enjoyed it. Got involved with the different organizations, started flying formation, started flying in the air shows at Air Venture. And I stayed continuing doing those type of programs throughout my Warbird career. Very fortunate. The last time I spoke with everybody, I was out at the Arsenal of Democracy, which looked great. We looked like we were going to have great weather, and unfortunately, on the day we were going to fly, the weather turned to low clouds and poor visibility, so we had to cancel that day. We had an alternate day the next day, and unfortunately, the weather was not cooperative then. It was a great event. We brought over 60 airplanes together in Culpeper, Virginia, and also at Manassas, Virginia, the large airplanes, the two B-29s and a B-17, some C-47s were all over at Manassas. But the rest of us were basically of the Culpeper, Virginia area. We had a well-planned, well-detailed program to go up and fly our airplanes from Culpeper up north of Dulles, down the Potomac, and then look forward to flying up Independence Avenue a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, best laid plans, the weather didn't cooperate it. However, we still had a great event. We had a lot of veterans there. Robert Bachet, who was our honorary air boss, came out to the airport, visited with all of us. He's 101 years old. Really, I mean, we owe a lot to the veterans like him. He actually he picked up the first B-29 at the factory and delivered it to the Army Air Corps back in the mid-40s. And he was also involved in the early raids in the B-29 flying over Japan. And then he actually put together a flight of, I believe it was a little over 500 B-29s that flew over the USS Missouri in Tokyo Harbor on September 2nd, 1945, as MacArthur signed the armistice with Japan. So he has a really historic background. But that's not the only veterans we had. We had one original Rosie the Riveter, and spry as ever. And she actually drove rivets on the B-29 factory when she was 17 years old. And she continued when they started restoring the B-29 dock. She became involved in that, and she drove rivets on that as well. And so as they restored that aircraft and brought it back to life. So she was there, and we had an SBD a gunner that was also with us, Paul Hillard. He was from a Wisconsin boy that as the nation went to war, volunteered, ended up being in the backseat of a SBD throughout the war, got into the tail end of the war and had a good career with that. And again, they were all with us very at the AOD, the Arsenal of Democracy, and they brought a lot to the table. So, I mean, these are the kind of events we do as EAA Warbirds of America, and it's a big program, and we consider it was a success, even though we didn't get to fly down the mall. Certainly, that's the main reason that all those airplanes came together and all those pilots to fly them, and why so many people spend so much time and energy to keep them flying, these warbirds that we treasure as they're in our possession for even a relatively short period of time in their all overall history. I mean, my AT6 is over 70 years old, and it was 1942 is when it was first manufactured. And of course, it served the armed forces well. And I think about all the pilots. They call it the pilot maker. I think of all the military pilots that flew that airplane before I had a chance to keep it in my charge for a short period of time. And I've been fortunate enough to fly a big variety of other types of warbirds. Again, I was supposed to fly the Grumman TBM Avenger and over the AOD, and that's a significant airplane. And I'm very proud of the fact that the owner of that aircraft keeps it flying and keeps it out there in front of the public to be a tribute to those veterans that we owe so much to, and also all the other people that sacrificed everything during the World War II efforts, for our nation, and really created the nation that we enjoy today. So that's a big part of why we do this. Aviation has meant a lot to me over the years. I mean, as a young man, when I first started, it was amazing that the responsibility that I had to learn to fly, to maintain the airplanes, learn knowledge about the weather and how it affects airplanes in general, and then to go on and have a chance to learn how to fly the airplanes in good weather as well as when the weather was not so good, and get my instrument ticket over the years, and eventually a commercial pilot's license, my certified flight instructor rating, which I used prior, early on in my aviation career, and I still maintain that today. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to pass that knowledge on. I just started flying with my grandson in gliders this last year. He'll be able to solo gliders later this year, and so far he's been enthused about it. Flying's not for everybody, but it certainly was a fantastic career and path for me. I met an incredible number of individuals over the years, both in my general aviation background, flying the different types of airplanes I became familiar with, the Beechcrafts, the Cessnas, the Pipers, as well as then in the Warbird community. The notable people that I've had the honor of meeting and working with on various different projects have been fantastic. I wouldn't trade them for anything. I've been a very fortunate person to live the life that I've had, and I really appreciate it. Going out and flying on a beautiful evening in a Piper Cub is every much as fun as pushing out the T6 and going flying in it in the afternoon as well. So again, I've always had aviation as a passion. I was fortunate enough, a lot of the people I flew with over the years, some of them were interested in light aircraft. Many others were not. However, I invited many of them to come up to the different programs, come out to the airport, and I've taken a lot of my co-pilots for a ride in other significant airplanes that I've owned over the years, and some of those have pursued it, and others did not. But I've always been a strong advocate of the recreational side of aviation. And I know a lot of people just, how much fun can it be to fly an airliner? It's still always a lot of fun. When I think back to a couple of real fun times, but one time as a typhoon was approaching Seoul, Korea, I landed a 747 in a fairly strong crosswind, and we had to shoot an IFR approach, broke out of the clouds at a comfortable height, about 500 feet or something like that, wind blowing across the runway, and taking the crab out and putting a nice crosswind correction in and landing that 747 in that crosswind that evening was just as much fun as it is when I do a nice job flying my T6 in a strong crosswind. So I get the same amount of pleasure out of flying that 747 as I did out of flying a Piper Cub or my T6 or even my Bonanza when I'm out. And it's instant gratification. You know immediately through feedback from the airplane and sometimes your passengers when you've done a really good job of flying the aircraft. And that's what I've always strived to do, is do a good job of flying whatever airplane I'm flying at the time. I got involved during my presidency with the government affairs side of EAA Warbirds of America. I really enjoyed that. Once again, meeting the significant people in the industry, people like Larry Kelly, and campaigns his B-25 around the country and exposes a lot of veterans to it. Walt Fricke with his Veterans Airlift Command does a great service to our current veterans, and he's a Warbird guy. Matter of fact, he was at the AOD flying his Veterans Airlift Command T6 there, which was a notable airplane to have there. And so it's fun having those. The challenges during that time is I felt while I was president, I really wanted to reach out to all the different members of Warbirds of America that we had and show them that, whether they flew a liaison airplane or the Doc in the B-29 or Fifi in the B-29 or the B-17 or any of the fighter aircraft, that there was a place for all of us at EAA Warbirds of America. Whether you were a historian, whether you just like to shoot pictures of airplanes. We wanted to make the Warbirds of America a very welcoming group. And I think I did that fairly successfully over the several years that I was involved in president. We worked well with the FAA to get our problems that may have arisen either from the maintenance side of it or the pilot qualification side, to get the FAA to understand where we're coming from and convince them that the EAA Warbirds of America and groups like us were really the current experts on operating these airplanes. And we developed a great relationship that they came to us, and we had a lot of working groups when problems arose from either a maintenance side or a pilot qualification side that we were able to work through and handle. So that was a big part of the satisfaction I got out of being Warbirds of America president. We did expand the number of members we had during those years, and we continue to expand them now. And I'm sure the last couple of presidents that we've had have done a good job of reaching out to the general public and convincing them why it's important for us to save these artifacts that we enjoy in our charge for a short period of time. Thank you very much for your service. Much primary trainers, P217 being the most common. Trying to be more inclusive, I decided that the trainers were a little unrepresented up in the Warbird areas. They were kind of pushed off into the back. And so we designated a little area called the Training Command, which is right next to our very famous Warbirds in Review program and right next to the big square piece of concrete that we put on that we display a lot of significant airplanes on every year at AirVenture. And it still is, that was just one side. We highlight all kinds of different airplanes, usually 5 or 6 airplanes each year. We park them out in the grass where they look very natural, and it's a fun place to be. And then one time we were sitting around and said, what we need to do is bring the people out to where the airplanes are and give them a little bit of a guided tour of what all these different types of airplanes. We usually have well over 400 Warbirds up at Oshkosh. And so myself, with some help, we came up with an idea of pulling around a trailer type vehicle behind a tractor and having a narrator go along on that program and give a little running commentary about the airplanes we were driving through as we begun the tour, and we drove through Fighter Town, which that draws everybody's interest. And then we went up through the past the living history elements up at AirVenture, which is where the guys come up in period costume, period tents, and they actually camp out for the week, which is a great asset to the Warbirds of America. And then we go on to the liaison airplanes, and we tell the significance of those aircraft. And then the various trainers, starting with the primary trainers like the Stearman or the PT-26 or the PT-22. And then we get an opportunity to drive into by some of the basic trainers, then eventually the advanced trainers. We give a little running history on the different types of aircraft, what their role was. And then eventually we go out through the more modern equipment as we look at the T-34s and T-28s. But anyway, those tours were significant. We got a chance to go out through the light bombers and then eventually the heavy bombers, the transport aircraft. We showed them the Navy aircraft and the fighters, and it became very, very successful to where we give the tours and drive the tractors, enjoy it just as much as the potential members that are on every one of those trams. And we do actually do a membership drive at the end of those tram tours, encourage people to join Warbirds of America and take over whatever interest they have and get more involved. And we've had great success with that. Without air shows, we still eventually got together and we had a lot of what we call formation clinics, where we actually, somebody has to teach the new guys that come along how to fly their airplane in formations like we do in the different shows around the country. And so organizations like the North American Trainer Association, the Red Star Association, the T-34 Association have had several clinics all across the country. And we do try to split them up on the East Coast, in the Midwest, on the West Coast, and everywhere in between. And we have these formation clinics where we all get together. We have some principles of how the organization is created. We teach the people how to fly their airplanes in formation. They all come being experienced pilots to this. Matter of fact, this is not for a beginning pilot to necessarily show up with his airplane and start flying formation right away. First, he wants to be very, very comfortable with his individual aircraft. Then we invite him to one of our big clinics around the country. There's going to be a nice clinic down in Louisiana this weekend, as a matter of fact. I won't be able to go to it because I'm doing a flyover for a veteran that just passed away, a World War II vet that just passed away this last week. And we're going to make a missing man flyover over his hometown. So that attracts me away from the formation clinic. But we can put together with our different sister organizations. The Commemorative Air Force is getting ready to roll out some renewed interest in their formation flying and their different clinics around the country. And so we're excited to see that several of the Warbird organizations are putting together plans to get their pilots more active, keeping more current in the type of flying that we enjoy doing, which is the formation flying, and being able to keep these airplanes available and the pilots qualified so they can display the aircraft at various air shows around the country. You mentioned a couple of the big ones. Sun and Fun is certainly big. AirVenture is big. But there's lots of little air shows that 4 to 8 T6s or other aircraft will get together and still do a flyover in formation and demonstrate these airplanes to the public and hopefully get them involved in some fashion in the history of the airplanes and the history of the organization and what we represent as part of the freedom we get to fly here in the United States. Yeah, that's one thing we really welcome into the organization, and it wouldn't happen if we didn't have a lot of volunteers. So we encourage everybody if they want to get involved, they can get involved as whatever they have area of expertise. So sometimes it's a flight line volunteer. Sometimes they may have some expertise in the maintenance side of it, and so they can volunteer in the to help our guys during an event like Oshkosh. Just even something as somebody gets a dead battery in their Warbird airplane that needs a little help to get the battery either charged up again or to get a power unit to power the airplane up and get it going for the day. And without the volunteers, we wouldn't have any of the kind of services that we readily have available to us at an event such as AirVenture Oshkosh. Our flight line group, they go all over the country to different events and volunteer their services to help maintain the orderly taxi in and taxi out of the Warbird aircraft at these events where people are present and they have the skill set that they know that the pilots trust them when they give them signals on where to turn and where to park. They also have the skill set to be able to keep the crowds a safe distance from the moving aircraft, because that's always a concern at any event. And there's lots of different things. We have a volunteer kitchen up at Oshkosh every year, and we get lots of help from people who simply volunteer at the kitchen to help keep us well fed. Obviously, I'm well fed, and over the years, and just keep us all being able to focus on the goal that we have at the individual air shows we go to around the country. These big events would not happen if we didn't have a cadre of volunteers that put countless hours in, both during the event as well as leading up to the event and even after. We start planning on the next AirVenture the day after the last airplane leaves AirVenture in Oshkosh. We start looking forward to the next year's event and start planning to how we can do things more successfully the next year. Well, I was very fortunate to meet Paul fairly early in my Warbird career. Had a tremendous amount of respect for him and the enthusiasm and the organization that Paul and Audrey and their son following Paul as chairman of the board, the organization that they built up over all these many years. And even as a young man, I knew about Paul Poveresny. I watched the P-64 show up at some of my local air shows back when I was still a teenager. And I remember seeing it's a notable paint job and it's a very memorable aircraft. And I was just blown away. I became a fairly high time T6 guy. The P-64 has North American Aviation. It's got a much larger engine than the T6 had, but it's a pretty amazing airplane. And I was very, very fortunate. There was going to be a time where actually we were going to work with Paul, and he was going to do a little bit of a ground school, showing us some ins and outs of the airplane. And unfortunately, he passed away before he got a chance to do all of that. But the EAA trusted me enough that they asked me to be one of the pilots on that aircraft. And so what an honor and a privilege to demonstrate that airplane. We brought it out a couple of different times over the last several years and flew it at Oshkosh during the Warbird portion of the show. In addition to that, we flew it over Oshkosh last year because that was the 50th anniversary of the AirVenture Oshkosh. Now, the airplane had showed up at Rockford and Sun and Fun and many other events before that, but it was the 50th anniversary of AirVenture Oshkosh. So they once again brought it out and had an opportunity to fly the airplane over the skies of Oshkosh, both several times before the event as well as during the air show itself. And it was just an honor and a privilege to think that, they entrusted me with that aircraft. It's the one and only P-64 flying in the world. And so it's a significant artifact. And I am one of those type of guys that I don't think airplanes should be just stuffed away in museums. They're made to be in the sky. So I think it's worthwhile to take those significant aircraft and put them up in the sky to allow everybody to get a piece of the history that they represent and to see the airplanes in their element, which is in the sky. We're in the planning stages on trying to create what the event's going to look like next year. One thing we were hoping to do was going to be the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. So in the Warbird side of it, we're going to call it the 75th plus one, as we tend to today. We're going to try to celebrate the end of World War II again and bring a significant Warbird presence and kind of tell the story a little bit of the history of the war from the very beginning and how our nation rose and got the manufacturing capability and design capability to start the war with relatively older aircraft. Our frontline fighter was the Wildcat, which compared to what the Germans and the Japanese had at that time, the Axis powers, was not quite as current as a fighter as what the Axis powers had. And so, the nation got busy and designed new fighters and brought them in relatively rapid order to be into the inventory. But of course, people had to learn to fly those aircraft. They had to start out in primary trainers, go to basic trainers, advanced trainers, single engine if they were going to be a fighter pilot, multi-engine if they were going to go be a bomber pilot, and had to learn all about that. In addition to that, we had to have the ground personnel. We had to have the maintenance personnel that knew how to work on those airplanes. So we created a tremendous arsenal of democracy that was put together to build all this equipment. And basically, we won the war by outbuilding the rest of the world when it came to American ingenuity, putting airplanes together on assembly line rather than each individually custom made, which was more common with the fighters of the day, to being able to roll out Mustangs on assembly lines and B-24s on assembly lines with the capability of General Motors and the Ford Motor Company, and the capability that they brought to the aircraft manufacturing business was just amazing. It's fun. I do it because it's fun. I mean, that's really the biggest thing. I get great enjoyment out of this. I mean, I do. I have a partner in my T6. He happens to be has an inspector authorization. The two of us maintain the airplane. We work on it. I work in conjunction with him, and we've learned a lot about the airplane over the year, how it works, how it's put together, how to properly maintain it, and all of that aspects from the flying as well as the maintaining give me a lot of pleasure in that it's something I'm capable of learning and then capable of executing, and keeping that airplane in the air is very satisfying for me. And, I try to impart that knowledge to my family and friends, and it's just an important part of my life. But all those things are somewhat related, and it's fun to find a passion that you can get behind and then work to make it, make a passion be a big part of your life and do the task at hand at the best of your ability, which is what I've always strived to do.